Hey, sure. Thanks a lot, Eleanor. This is exciting. I'm about to talk about some of the stuff that I geek out on harder than anything else. SQL and also product management. This is not a SQL class. Um, I do SQL classes, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll share when I'm doing that. I think we'll probably do some SQL 101 courses in the next couple weeks. But this is a course to inspire you and to tease you and to help you understand how SQL has really changed my career and how I think it can really be jet fuel for anybody who's either breaking into product management or who's already there and who wants to take that next step. Um, so yeah, let's get into it. We've got about 45 minutes. I think at around 12:30, 12:35, we'll get into some Q&A. But I think Eleanor might share a couple questions in chat. We're gonna do a quick poll, and as those results flow in, we can kind of we can talk about them a little bit. But yeah, I'm interested to know who's the audience here, because product people come in so many shapes and sizes. Um, that's kind of what's awesome about product. So yeah, as those results flow in, there's three questions. First, yeah, where was your latest stop in employment? Hey, it looks like it's kind of all across the board, which is kind of what I expected, right? There is no normal. It's like it's not really startup and big company, but that's one way to break it down. Look at that. Oh my God, it's almost even. Um, wow. Okay. And then yeah, we've got a couple other questions which Eleanor is going to share. And yeah, here's just kind of as you answer those questions, just sort of a brief overview of this presentation. Yeah, this is the briefest overview. If there's anything that you can do in a company today to make yourself more valuable, especially at a startup, it's bring insights to the table because, insights point the way towards impact. And SQL is an extremely powerful tool for that. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey. My journey is like it's kind of a playbook. Your journey will not be my journey, but I think you can learn a little bit from it and apply it to your own circumstances to really learn SQL. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what it's like to be a PM at bigger companies versus smaller companies. You might know something about that, or you might not. We'll talk about SQL across the software development lifecycle, because it's not just used in discovery; it's used at every step of the way. And then it's used again as you get new insights and feed that back into the product development lifecycle. And we'll go through an example. I probably could have spent this whole 45 minutes talking through this example. The example is, it's probably touching on SQL, not 101, but maybe 301. So, but we've got code. You can take it home. You can apply it to your own data sets. And you can decide whether or not you want to take that next step in your SQL journey to be able to manipulate it, write it from scratch, and do your own analysis. And then, yeah, we'll get into Q&A. Let's see. Eleanor, are these results in? Should I share the results of this quick poll? I've never used
Yeah,
this.
the results are in. I can give like a quick run through.
Nice.
So looks like you're all coming from like it's even a mix of like startups, medium-sized company, big corporation. It's really like one third, one third, one third. Then big majority of you are in product, not surprising, and seems like majority of this group is either not familiar with SQL or I've run like a few queries, but we don't have a lot of experts.
That is so cool. I had no idea what I would see here. We got a lot of PMs, people who, have had PM experience here, which is awesome. But also we got a few people who are, wanting to take that next step to get there. There are opportunities for it. This can help you out a lot. Yeah, familiarity with SQL. Okay, we see the majority have run a few queries. That can mean anything, right? And then, yeah, I think we've got, hey, there's zero SQL experts. Maybe we're just very modest here, which is awesome. Um, so yeah, a little bit about me. I've been in product for about 10 years. I've been, product manager at, on pods, cross-functional pods at smaller companies, and I've been, head of product at some smaller companies as well. I got my start professionally in editorial online publishing coming out of college. I was not a tech guy. Um, in 2008, I found tech. I was very lucky to catch on at Stack Overflow as it was growing very rapidly. And I was introduced to SQL. What's kind of cool is actually the first time I was introduced to SQL, I wasn't like, oh, I need to learn this. I didn't learn it, but it was made evident that there was a toolbox there for me. And at a later time, I realized, hey, I kind of want to crack that open because I can't answer the questions that I want to answer. And then, yeah, the rest is sort of history. Most recently, I worked at a company called Papa, which is sort of a health tech marketplace. And yeah, I love to teach. And that's kind of why we're here today. This is like a very quick playbook. And this is the first time I've ever shared this. And I think maybe this playbook needs to get refined a little bit. But, how I learned SQL was I had opportunity. I was at a company that was growing fast. There was a vacuum of expertise. Nobody owned marketing analytics. That's what's kind of cool about working at a startup is you find opportunities where nobody is taking ownership. I was using Google Analytics and I was like tapping on it. Like, what's this raw data that's flowing under here? Google Analytics and these reporting UIs couldn't answer those questions for me. And yeah, I was driven to solve, real world problems. I was intrinsically motivated to learn and to crawl over the learning curve. That's really useful. Not everybody has that opportunity, but if you can be intrinsically motivated, if you can learn on your own problems, on your own data, you've got a step ahead of the competition. If you're currently employed, if you're currently working on data sets at work, now is the time to get access to that data and to learn on your own data. Um, I was really lucky working at Stack Overflow because um, it is a community company, and the way that it works, not only is the developer community there actually writing queries and sharing queries on top of public data sets, but I was really lucky because my colleagues kicked butt. They were so nice, but you have to be really proactive about asking for help. Asking for help is really hard for a lot of us. Don't be afraid. Um, so yeah, big companies versus startups, they're different. But actually, I think you're hearing about it out in the landscape, big companies are flattening a little bit. And so I think a lot of the value that a PM can bring with SQL is applicable no matter where you're working. Um, at startups, right, as I said, fill voids, wear many hats. And a PM is going to touch every aspect of the product development lifecycle. And there's limited resources. You can be that analyst on a cross-functional team, and you can save your company some money. You can do QA with SQL. I've done it everywhere I've worked. Reproducing session logs, right? When you're clicking through a new feature in a test environment, write a SQL query, make sure that all your analytics events were firing so that when you ship that product, it is A plus and you know how people are using it. Own quality as a product manager. SQL can really help you with that. Fareed, who works at Reforge, this is how this deck came about. I've heard him say this multiple times. If you can do one thing to be successful and to add value, learn SQL. So, how are we doing? It's 12:12. We're ripping through here. Maybe this will turn into a SQL 101 course when we get to the code. This is the software development lifecycle. I think one way to look at it is, there's three phases. There's discovery and planning, there's implementation, delivery, and monitoring. And as a PM, you can use SQL at every step of the way. I could talk about this for a long time. But getting really specific, I think, on like where there's really big moments. Um, a lot of ideation comes from intuition. Whether it's a CEO with an idea or you're bringing that idea or somebody else's. SQL can help you validate that it's the right idea. And setting goals. Like one of the most, I think, crisp things you can do as a product manager to demonstrate that you are non-arbitrary and that you know your stuff is to set goals up front. And SQL can be extremely powerful to help you do that yourself, right? You might not have an analyst around. Or you might have an analyst. You might be the most experienced analyst. You can be. I have been. And impress executive stakeholders. I've been to, I think we've all been in quarterly planning meetings where, you're with the CEO or, the VP of product and they're like, action item, do analysis on this, answer this question. And it's like, wait, we're in planning. We're supposed to be planning for what we're implementing. Um, get ahead of planning and ahead of those sessions where the CEO is going to be like, hey, let's do this analysis by having done it and bringing some of it to the table. This has probably kept me employed for some periods of time. Implementation, I touched on it. This is, this, have you been there before? Quality assurance as a PM in a startup? There's not always a QA engineer or testing, or the developers who are working on your software are not always super rigorous about testing their own code. And then things slip and you discover in production that your analytics is deficient, events are named incorrectly. You cannot derive the insights through rollout because something slipped. And as a PM, you can do that QA and testing for analytics, especially during QA. If you're a designer, or if you have design sensibilities, and of course we all do if you're a product person, you also need to do, more qualitative user acceptance testing. But there's some very tactical things you can do here with SQL. And then delivery and monitoring. Testing in production, we're all there. It might be day one of an A/B test. You might be doing a phase rollout. Before you share, hey, we are live, with all of your stakeholders, you might want to do that final pass. And you can't always rely on your reporting tools. That's, I think, actually one of, the big questions here. Why not just use Mixpanel or Google Analytics? You're going to find out in a minute. You should be able to rely on those, but the data that is flowing underneath those tools is not always foolproof. Data is dirty, and you can see that. You can get to the lowest level with SQL to see that. So, wow, here we are. It's 12:16. We ripped through that. We're gonna get into the code a lot faster than I thought we would. How are we doing? Am I keeping your attention? I wish we had more poll questions. So yeah, let's go into an example. We're gonna create a histogram with SQL. I thought this was kind of a fun challenge because histograms are data visualization. It's the best way to paint a picture of how users are using your product, what is the distribution of types of users. This is how segmentation and persona creation starts. This is like, I would say, an essential toolbox in a PM's bag. You don't necessarily need to be able to write SQL to generate a histogram, but you need to be able to generate a histogram. And you can't always get it from your tools, or if you can you always trust it? So we're going to use BigQuery. BigQuery is amazing. It's an amazing tool. I don't know. I'm sure maybe that should have been a question that we had in here. How many of y'all have touched BigQuery? Um, this is, Google's data warehouse tool and SQL console. One of the coolest things about BigQuery is all of these public data sets that are made available. So fun. If you're weird, you think it's fun. Um, and this you can find something that interests you that then gives you, that motivation to break through the learning curve and get to the point where you can really use your skills at work. We're going to use an example data set here, which is New York City taxi trips in 2022. Um, I'm tapping things and it's like, it doesn't want me to tap it. Technical difficulties, love it. Let's see if this works. Um, and, kind of let's work backwards, starting with a business problem, goal, or a hypothesis, this might be something that, a stakeholder says like, hey, let's focus our product strategy on people who are taking expensive rides. And hey, that sounds like a good idea, right? Um, everybody wants to move up market. But let's answer that question. Let's be more data driven about how we're going to answer that question. Uh, so let's paint a picture with a histogram. And first, I'm going to kind of just demonstrate what this histogram looks like. BigQuery is great because tables are the de facto report. You'll never get called out for sharing a table. I love tables. But some people are more visual and it can be useful to draw a picture. BigQuery lets you do that. Here, let's kind of look first at just percent rides. We're going to get in the code in a minute, but what we see here is, yeah, this is a distribution. This is all taxi rides, all yellow taxi rides in New York City in 2022. There's something like 30 million of them. This is kind of big data. I don't know what's big data. And what we see is that, hold on one second. Yeah, there we go. We've got ranges for each of these bars, which defines a total cost for the ride. And what we see is here that 57% of all rides were between $10 and $20. That's cool. Like I can just look at this and I feel like I feel my business better than I did before. If we look, we've added a few other results with the SQL query. We can see how many rides occurred in each bin. I can't zoom. I'm trying to zoom out. Oh man, hopefully y'all can see this because I'm struggling to zoom out right now. You can see how many rides we've had per bin. You could see percent of rides per bin. You could see total revenue per bin. This is a lot of money. $300 million was spent on rides between $10 and $20, which is 40% of the total revenue that we brought in. So, off the bat, we're much better equipped to come back to that stakeholder to pressure test their hypothesis and to move the conversation forward to accelerate the product development process. Everybody wants to move faster. You can help. And so, yeah, like, should we focus on rides that are, paid for, by the most expensive rides? That's about, let's call it 3% of rides. But it's also about 12% of revenue. There's not a good answer, yes or no. I think the question is where are you? What have you been working on? And then you need to come up with a strategy, which then will define what you prioritize. But you're in a much better place now to answer that question. All right, we're at 12:22. We got 23 minutes left, which is awesome. Let's just talk about the code really quickly. Again, this is meant to just kind of geek you out. Don't worry if it doesn't stick. This code is available for you to copy paste. Let's first start with, so distributions. This is maybe statistics 101, or I never took statistics, but I kind of learned it on the job. So I might be using words that don't make sense. Your data is dirty. And with these two lines of code, you can see that. There are quantiles are equivalent bins with your entire data set distributed equally. And so we know that this data set is 30 million rides. And so 30 million divided by 10, that's, I guess, 3 million. We know there's 3 million rides in each one of these bins. And what we have here are edges. And so there's about 3 million rides between negative $2,000 and $10. And then there's 3 million rides between 17 million and $17 and $20. So this is a very easy way to visualize a distribution. But don't just share this with your stakeholders. Presentation matters. That's another thing, like design your docs, use the right fonts, use the right labels, use commas. If you've got thousands or millions or billions, use commas. I learned that once a while ago. Somebody called me out. I was like, what are you talking about? But yeah, one of the things we see here is our data is dirty. So like, let's say this was the data that was powering one of your BI tools. Could you just at a glance trust and roll with what you see in a visualization? That's dangerous. Hopefully you're working with an analyst who did some of that quality assurance, user acceptance testing on maybe the data models ahead of time. If you're working at a startup, probably not. That probably didn't happen. So you can add a lot of value by just writing this query. Let's take it a step further. Actually, this might be a step before, median, right? Like median is the simplest way to represent a distribution. Median means out of 30 million rides, there's 15 million rides that were more expensive than $16, and there's 15 million rides that were less expensive than $16. And so at a glance, we can start to talk about the typical ride. Maybe like we can even have conversations about UI, given this insight. How many digits do we need to support? You could start to have those conversations. Super useful for design. But right, to like take that report to maybe the next step, we want to produce something that, am I going to be able to zoom? I guess not. Maybe I'm just not using the right shortcut. This is, let's call it 20 lines of code. You could do it in a lot less, but to make it pretty, and you've got to do a little bit more. This is SQL 103, SQL 301. You'd probably, if you were doing a SQL course, you might get to this. Let's say you're spending 2 hours a day. You might get to this on day 14. Or actually, the way SQL works is it's building blocks. It's Frankenstein queries. You start with something really simple, like select, column, from. You generate a result, and then you manipulate it step by step until you get, that result that's shareable and that packs a punch. So that's really what's happened here. A couple cool just call outs. There's if you Google how to write a histogram with SQL, you're gonna find 100 blog posts, and and there's several flavors of SQL, and nobody is gonna give. There's no correct answer, but doing a little bit of work upfront to group, to identify outliers, and then bundle them into one of your bins is extremely useful. It's a thing that I do anytime I'm presenting a distribution. And you see that here. What we're doing is, for those, you saw there were rides that were negative $2,000. I have no idea why. Were they refunds? Was it fraud? I have no clue. That's not the problem I want to solve right now. And so through this code, we grouped those outliers on the edges. Otherwise, you get something that looks something like, ah, this doesn't make, this doesn't want to work. Let's see. Yeah, otherwise, you're going to get a histogram that looks something like this. Because, in fact, there are records at every step of the way to, there were some taxi rides that are $10,000. I think there was like an NFL player who went from like Ohio to Buffalo or something like that. Um, that's probably not that far. Buffalo is basically in Ohio, right? Um, so right, so there's some kind of cool code that's in here, which y'all should use. You should try it, which identifies outliers, groups them, and then what we're also doing is we're creating ranges. Because if you just kind of create a distribution out of the box, what you're going to get is you're going to get tick marks, and that's generally good enough. But again, like we want to, presentation matters. And so there's some code in here that programmatically identifies the floor and the ceiling of the bin, uh, puts it into the data frame. This is not Python. This is not a data frame, but you can actually use Python in BigQuery. Um, and then we're counting, values on top of those bins, which is awesome. I kind of taught myself how to do this while going through it, which, means like anybody can do it. That's pretty much it. Guess what? We're at 12:29. Wow. How'd that work? How'd that work out? Um, yeah, I think again, this next course that Crystal's teaching is awesome. She actually does go through some SQL, using SQL for customer segmentation. I'm not entirely sure, like if there's prerequisite understanding of SQL going into that, but I don't believe so. This looks like a great opportunity to take your analytics knowledge to the next step. Um, that's all I got. How about that? How'd we do, Eleanor? What do you think? What'd I miss?
Doing great. We're right on time for 15-minute Q&A. And we do have a few questions
Awesome.
in the Q&A functionality. And we can get started. I think Jennifer had a question. Jennifer, if you're still here, would you mind coming off mute and maybe like ask your question and give us like a bit more context around it?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, Sam. My question, and I think I saw other questions similar, is about AI assisted using SQL. Like, what's your approach to using AI tools? I've heard that if you were to upload all your data, which first of all, that's probably insensitive to do, but like ChatGPT is not great at doing the data analysis. It's better at spitting out the SQL that you should use. So I don't know, in your experience, how do you use AI tools with SQL?
Yeah. I mean, this is a rapidly changing landscape. Um, you can never just trust one of these tools today. You cannot necessarily go to bat with the result of a single tool's output. You can bring, you're right, SQL code that is generated by, ChatGPT or Gemini or Perplexity is pretty awesome now. Um, Highly recommend trying it out, but there needs to be a human in the loop. There needs to be somebody who's familiar with the data in the loop before you share insights. Um, I've used ChatGPT quite a bit now for troubleshooting code. There's so many flavors of SQL. There's MySQL, there's Postgres, there's others. There's Snowflake is slightly different flavor than BigQuery. Not that different, but you'll find like you'll be like, all right, I copied this Snowflake code, and my date trunk is not working. Go ask ChatGPT. It's really good at that. It might not give you the correct answer first, but it's kind of this is where prompt engineering like is real. Like I've seen if you double tap on what ChatGPT responded, be like, oh no, but then I got this error code. Um, it can be really good at giving you very useful code. It's a great way to learn. And it's a powerful tool no matter, I think, who you are. I'm really excited for what's coming next. I have no idea. Like human language querying is a very active area of development where sorry, natural language querying. There's several products out there that are pretty fresh. But you'd be able to ask your data. Probably, you could probably go be like ask them this question. Should we focus our strategy on expensive rides like that? That's where it's good. That's where we're going. But quality assurance is critical.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. We have another question from Shannon. Shannon, same thing here, just like to create a bit more dynamic, like a better dynamic. Would you mind coming off mute and maybe like, yeah, tell us what your question is and share a bit more context around it?
Yeah, so one thing I struggle with as a product manager is there's so many skills to know and so many areas to grow in. And I'm just curious, Sam, from your perspective, when do you think it makes sense to, focus on like this skill, for example, like learning how to write SQL queries versus spending time improving user research skills or building strategy? Like how did you work through that yourself?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the answer is it depends. And it depends where you are. Like where are you today? On your career, what are you working on? Do you have free time? Are you sitting on your hands as well, something while your code is compiling? That's a lot of actually software developers don't know SQL. I've taught these courses before and they're like, what is that? How do you do that? I think that's a very personal question. I think there's never a wrong time as a PM to learn SQL. I can tell you that. Um, if you have a little bit of data at work or that you care about at your fingertips, upload it to BigQuery. There's some PII concerns, and you got to be careful sharing data that's sensitive. Start running a query on your own business problems. See if you can replicate a chart that you see in your BI tools through SQL, because that's how it starts. And your SQL learning journey is not going to be like you will break through when you need to solve problems that you need to solve. So yeah, maybe I just backed into a good answer there. Solve the most urgent problem, at your company for you. I think that's probably a good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then we have another long question from an anonymous participant. I'll read it out loud. So with the rise of LLMs, AI-assisted tools such as Blaze SQL and robust product analytics, BI tools such as Amplitude, do you foresee comprehensive SQL knowledge being necessary for the PM career track? It seemed there is an opportunity to become a jack of all trades with various tooling, top-level understanding, and have understand your database to make a data-driven decision on how to answer questions without writing queries.
So yeah, I think is comprehensive SQL knowledge necessary for PM track? No, not at all. Like some of the best PMs I've worked with, actually probably the best PMs I've worked with, don't write SQL. This is, it's a tool and it's a really powerful one. It's one way to differentiate yourself and to add value. Hopefully, is that a good enough answer?
We
And
won't
it's
know.
SQL's fun. Like I think you'll find that. It's hard at first, but it's fun. So All right.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, next question we have from Tess. Can you share more details on the specific QA steps you use SQL for? And Tess, if you're still here and want to add like more context to your question, please feel free to come off mute.
I think that covers it. I'm just curious sort of what those typical use cases are, since I've done a lot of the QA, but not with SQL.
Totally. It's hard to paint a picture without having, analytics code or, work code in front of us. But yeah, I think there's two very specific use cases. One of which is when you're implementing a new feature and, maybe you're using Segment or some other, tracking framework, and you need to make sure you're recording every event in a flow. Because when you ship that feature, you need to understand from afar how it's being used, and if it's buggy. And what you can do as a PM is open up your test environment, right? It's a brand new feature that's maybe gonna semi-ready to roll off into the public. Don't just test it for how it looks and feels and functionality, although you should do that. Then go into your, data warehouse or your analytic systems, reproduce your session logs, right? Find your user ID, sort the events that you just went through, and make sure that every event is firing and is named correctly. And once you do that granular QA, you can be confident that once you're in delivery and monitoring, you can aggregate that row level data to produce trustworthy charts on usage and then ultimately business impact. That's one obvious use case. The other is, SQL is, we're talking about reading from databases. SQL is also used to write to databases. I usually don't have write permissions when I work at a company. When you are testing, and a lot of test engineers, what they will do, or really any software developer will do, is in a test environment, you have to reset variables. So for instance, let's say you're designing an onboarding flow. Once users get through it, their account changes, right? It goes from onboarded 0 to onboarded 1. And so if you want to reproduce the onboarding steps in a test environment, you will need to reset that value from 1 to 0 so that you can go through that flow again. And that can be done with SQL by accessing a database and by writing to it. Those are two, I think, very explicit examples for QA with SQL.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, next question from Grant. When would you use SQL for data visualization as opposed to Python? And maybe Grant, if you want to, same thing, come off mute, add more context to it, please feel free.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess not just Python, but any kind of something like R or Python. When it looks maybe more complicated to me in SQL, and so I'm just curious, why would you stay in SQL?
Got it. So
for what use cases?
You think Python is more complicated than SQL, or SQL is more complicated than Python?
Well, just looking at your histogram code in SQL looks more complicated to me.
Great call. Great call. You're right. Like creating a histogram in Python can be very straightforward and beautiful, right? The way that the styles come out of the box in certain Python packages are just kick butt. It's not really an either or. Personally, I find Python more complex. Python's great, far more dynamic. You can build websites with Python, and you can do a lot of cool machine learning stuff, and also, right, the reporting tools that you can use with Python are kick butt. If you're familiar with Python, and if you can, if you've broken through that learning curve, know if you need to learn SQL. Although there's some great ways to integrate SQL and Python. You can use both. And actually, you can use both in BigQuery. It depends what you're familiar and what you're comfortable with. Um, I'm preferential towards SQL. I think there's something beautiful about it and straightforward. But I think if you had to start somewhere, depending upon what your aspirations are, if you want to be a software developer, if you want to be you know, a data like a real data scientist, at some point you're going to have to learn Python, most likely. But you could start with SQL or you could start with Python. SQL is great because you probably have, if you have Snowflake or depending upon what your data warehouse tooling is at work, SQL is great. I should probably write a blog post on that. I'm sure there's 100 of them out there. This stuff is always changing so rapidly right now, too. I can't keep up.
Okay, I think we
Thanks.
have time for maybe one last question. Okay, from Aditya. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So I work at a big company. Do you see any friction with folks on the analytics team if I start to pull queries? If so, how do you manage that relationship? Same thing, Aditya, if you want to come off mute, add more context, please.
Hey, yeah,
Join us.
you got my name right. Thank you.
Oh,
So one thing, I work at a big company. We have a lot of analytics folks. I could anticipate me trying to learn. I think earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned that you just had the opportunity because people weren't around to do it. I'm kind of in the boat of like, I want to add more skills. I value this specifically. How do I get around, potential territorial disputes at a big company? How do you manage that?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So I think it starts with, having access, right? Do you have access to a console where you can query data? And that's the first step. And I think no matter who you are, you should try to get it. If you don't have access, uh, make friends with somebody who might be able to give it to you. And if they still say no, ask them if they can, export a CSV that you can upload into BigQuery. So that's the first step, get access. And then second, yeah, you're right. You have a decision to make around what is your role in delivering insights at your company? Who do you work with? Who are the personnel? Who are the personalities at the table? It's super important to get clear on roles at a big company. Like you don't want to step on somebody's toes. Um, and people are territorial. Um, I think get clear on roles, and you can influence your role, right? If you start to demonstrate some value, maybe in a side channel, I think you can formalize how you can play a role in analytics. So it's a really interesting problem. Wow, we did it. How about that? Amazing. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I am gonna do some SQL 101 in the coming week or two. And we'll use, free open data, which is a great place to learn, as you can see here. But I hope I inspired y'all a little bit. Try to find a business problem that you care about. Copy paste some code, run it, and see where it gets you.